Looking for music that lifts your spirit and fills your heart? Experience the powerful sound of the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square. Now streaming on all your favorite music platforms. Find the Tabernacle Choir on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, Amazon Music, and Pandora. Let the music of the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square inspire you today and every day. Whether you're at home, in the car, or on the go, enjoy the beauty of their world-renowned sound anytime. The Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square, streaming now. It's time for the Larry H. Miller Utah Summer Games at Southern Utah University in Cedar City. Register today to participate in the 40th anniversary season of a Utah sports tradition at utahsummergames.org. Participate in over 50 sports around the state. Then plan to join the opening ceremonies Friday, June 5th, presented by State Bank of Southern Utah. Register today to participate in the 40th anniversary season of the Larry H. Miller Utah Summer Games.
Accessing.
When TV and radio collide.
Love it.
Wow. This is what you get. You're listening to JJ and Alex.
Don't touch that dial.
On 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Welcome back. JJ and Alex, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Alex Curie, Jeremiah Jensen. Thanks for being with us on the program, everybody. Let's jump out. We've got to talk to somebody. Oh, hold on. I was just checking real quick. Yep. Mitch Harper, our BYU insider for KSLSports.com. He's been on the show a few times.
I bet
before.
He'd say Geddy Lee's the greatest bass player of all
yeah,
time.
he totally would. He's like, I'm not weighing in on this. I'm going to throw out some 90s
He's a
hip-hop.
Rush guy.
Yeah. Mitch, what's going on, man? How are things?
Doing good, guys. I survived a week as a single parent along with the portal, so now portal continues to ramp up, but in a two-parent home, so I'm doing okay.
Oh, good.
Okay,
I thought
good.
you meant so. You mentioned
Thoughts and prayers.
You mentioned a single parent, and then you mentioned the transfer portal, and I was like, "That's the bad transfer portal, brother."
She jumped in the portal. I don't blame her.
And they're like, "No, this week the transfer portal's over. She came back. I was
Being
able
married to a beat writer is not a lot of fun. I get it.
I was able to match.
There's a lot of
the different.
probably better NIL out there for her than you're offering.
Yeah, she was on a girls' cruise, and so I was holding it down with the kids and the portal, and so it's a little bit more manageable to try to make calls and texts with the portal this week. So, but I'm happy to be on, guys.
We love that you come on with us. So here's the right out of the gate, the names that have been in and out of the portal. Like you said, it was a wild week for BYU. With the added and subtracted names from the transfer portal, I'm not even just saying AJ DeBonsa leaving to the draft is something we already knew was going to happen. But the names that left and then the names that came in, is this a net loss for BYU so far in the transfer portal this year for basketball, or has it been a net positive?
It's a net loss so far because Rob Wright's absence is significant because BYU doesn't have a point guard right now. And, Rob Wright has his issues, and look, he's still going through this decision, and whether it's going to be Kentucky or BYU, I think he's really enjoyed his time at BYU the past year. He was an explosive player, though. I mean, a very talented guard, and sure, the defense wasn't always the best, but that was the entire BYU team this year. He's the type of player, though, that BYU wants to build around, and if you don't have him, there is a glaring hole at that point guard position. The rest, I think Kennard Davis, that's a loss as well, even though it was a mixed bag all the time with him. Still, he started every game that he played this past season. And right now, BYU's got two commitments in Colin Chandler, who is a perfect fit. I think it's going to work out nicely with Kevin Young. And then Tyler Betsey, you kind of take a flyer. You say third school, 3 years. He can shoot the three, take a chance on him. But anything more than that, it's kind of to be determined. So right now, I'd say it's a net negative, considering that there's no retention at all in this roster. The only guy that logged minutes as of right now was Hadim Boop. And that's the only player that played at a game this past season that would be projected to be on the roster as of right now for next season.
Well, Colin Chandler is a nice get for them, and obviously originally committed to BYU and then went with Mark Pope to Kentucky. Getting him back, what's the reasonable expectation for him? We watched him in high school, and we've now watched what he did at Kentucky. What kind of role is he going to play for BYU, and what should we expect from him?
Well, I think he's got to be, someone that's one of the faces of the program. I think that's where the challenge in front of Kevin Young and Colin Chandler to level up his game to be the key guy and maybe a key guy off the court too, and be a leader in the locker room and bring his maturity and experience to that BYU locker room. I think that was a lesson that was learned by Kevin Young and his coaching staff, the importance of that this past season, because when Richie Saunders went down, it was all on the shoulders of A.J. DeBonsa on the court and off the court. And that was a lot to ask of a freshman who, even though he is generational, that was a lot to ask for him. Whereas Colin Chandler, he's got perspective. He's married. He's been through it a bit in college basketball. He's played at a high level. And I think also evolving his game more than just simply being an elite three-point shooter. Just he get more opportunities on the ball to take it off the bounce and get to the hoop, kind of like a Richie Saunders. And it's kind of similar to Richie in the fact that 2 years with Mark Pope Richie Saunders was viewed as a glue guy. Then he emerged under Kevin Young as one of the best players in the Big 12. Colin Chandler has been one of the key guys for Kentucky this past season, but it didn't get going until this past year. Can he take it to a higher level? So I think his shooting, though, is key. One thing I do question, though, is, how can he handle maybe some of the physical defenses in the Big 12, the Houstons of the world, where, they're going to pressure the ball. And, I thought Rob Wright did a really good job of navigating that. Even though BYU came out on the losing end, they didn't turn the ball over much against teams that, bring a lot of pressure and physicality. That's something, an area where Colin Chandler can improve. But it's an important get. And I think it's you want to get players that want to be back in the home state. And for BYU to get him, it's a perfect fit. And I think Kevin Young will do quite well with Colin Chandler.
If you see, all these different names that are added and subtracted, I know that people look at this and they go, man, this was a pretty bad second year for Kevin Young, considering the expectations that were enormous. And despite the fact that A.J. DeBonsa, he outperformed even the crazy expectations that he had for him. However, on top of all of it, I think a lot of people are looking at this and they're going, this guy, he comes in, and every year, basically, I feel like any college basketball team that's worth anything, they're doing exactly what BYU is doing right now. And almost like, the national champions this year, not a soul of those guys weren't transfers. The only team in the Elite Eight, I think, that didn't have transfers starting for them was Duke. Those are the only guys. And in the end, what Kevin Young doing, we used to consider it bad because they're just transferring guys out. Oh, it means your program's busted. But now the expectation is you have to have massive turnover.
Definitely. And, that's going to be something where in also pairing it up with experience and veterans too. And I think that's where the addition of Colin Chandler is nice for BYU, because he does bring experience at the college level. Teams that are led by freshmen, they don't typically win and go to the Final Four and win it all. Arizona was, maybe a little bit of an exception where they had 3 freshmen as leading scorers, but ultimately didn't get across the finish line and get the job done. So you got to have that nice blend of the best of all worlds. And the nice thing for BYU in assembling rosters is they got a coaching staff with Kevin Young that they can, tap into a lot of different connections, a lot of different paths to really assemble that roster to try to get the best of those worlds with the veteran experience, the high-level one-and-done type of players. They've got that potentially with Bruce Branch III coming in. So you got to find a way to also get these players to improve. And I think that was one of the things you look at this past year was how many guys actually got better. A.J. DeBonsa got better. I think Rob Wright got better as a player. But outside of that, there were a lot of players that maybe regressed. And you could even argue that maybe Richie Saunders, before the injury, took a little bit of a step back from the high level that he was playing at the year prior. And I think that will be something of area of focus to make sure that these players that all join in on this roster, they get better from their previous stops and level up at BYU instead of maybe regressing or staying status quo. Because if you're going to try to, get to a position where you can be a top 16 seed and be a squad that can make a deep run in the NCAA tournament, you've got to have players improving and leveling up. And that was one of the reasons, that first year that team got better over the course of the year, whereas this past season they really took a step back, especially when all the injuries started to pile up.
Obviously, a lot of work still to be done with that roster, but do they still need to go out and get like a number one guy? You look at Colin Chandler, is he a number one guy? Are they going to expect Bruce Branch to be the number one guy, or do they still need to go out and get that guy?
I think they still need to get that guy, and that's where, Rob Wright III would make a lot of sense if they can get him back out of the portal. And that would be a challenge, too, for Rob Wright, because he's lived in a space where in high school he was with Cooper Flagg and talented Montverde Academy, and at Baylor was with VJ Edgecombe. And then this past year he's with AJ and Richie. That would be a new role for Rob Wright even. But I think with the experience that he's had with working with Kevin Young, if they can get him back, that would be huge. But, yeah, I think they do need that number one guy because Bruce Branch III is probably, at best the second or third option. He's pretty young. It's a different, thought process than AJ, where you knew the moment you got AJ, he was going to be a guy that was going to be a program changer to carry the team as an 18-year-old, and he turned 19 during the season. Bruce Branch, I think it's going to be a little bit different thought. He's only 17. He won't turn 18 years old until this fall when the ball tips this November. So he's a really young player still. So I think they still probably need a number one. And that's where, again, I think Rob Wright makes the most sense because you've got that relationship. You've got that existing, knowledge of what he's capable of and how he ticks and operates day in, day out, and trying to get him to the highest levels possible. Colin Chandler could be that too. It's just, you haven't seen it yet. And that's why it's very similar to Richie Saunders. Maybe that can progress over the course of next year. But on opening night, I think, right now it would seem like BYU doesn't have that clear number one on this roster. They got to go get that guy.
Make game day yours. Tickets, food and drinks, stats, and streaming. Everything you need is in the Utah Mammoth app. Download today and make game night easy. Download on both Android and iPhone. Tusk Top.
Bear Bachmeier goes into his first actual spring with BYU, and as the football team wrapped up their spring practices and everything, everybody's buzzing about the jump, even in the short couple of months that he had to get ready for spring ball. Were you able to see some of that looked maybe a little bit more sharp? You have your eyeballs on this guy all season long. From one place to the next, what is it that people are thinking that is already jumping off of the page again for this kid?
Well, he's just got so much more knowledge of the playbook. And, I think there's still going to be a question of the arm strength, of, how consistent he can be his accuracy on the deep ball. But in terms of this offense and how it's constructed with the tight ends, with Walker Lyons and Roger Saliapage, they can attack over the middle time and time again. And I think that can mask maybe some of the question marks at the wide receiver spot. BYU's got some talent at wide receiver. I think there's just a feeling, kind of like what we were just talking about with basketball, who's that real number one guy? Maybe it's JoJo Phillips at the moment, but I still think that kind of leaves a little bit to be desired at that position if JoJo is the number one right now. And that could materialize and he could become a big-time player in the Big 12, but still a lot to be seen from that group. Whereas the tight ends, they're going to be a key piece to all of this. And Bear Bachmeier and the chemistry that's being developed there, I think that's, a big reason why you're going to see some growth from Bear, but also his knowledge of the offense. And even he acknowledged that, he gets 2 or 3 looks in a given play thrown at him. He's got a lot more autonomy in this offense this year. And you kind of saw that gradually level up over the course of the season in his passing attempts over the course of the year. Bear will be really good for BYU this year. I think it's just a matter of, he's got to take care of the football. I think that's a nice baseline, what he did last season, where he was good at that. And that's kind of in his DNA of sorts, to take care of the football. And that's a nice starting point. He continues to do that. BYU's in a position to win some ball games because I think he's also going to have a better offensive line to work with next season as well, with Paki Finau at left tackle Andrew Gentry at right tackle. Paki Finau comes in from Washington, and he's going to anchor down that left tackle spot and be a pretty good one for BYU. I think the collective whole offensive line is better than a season ago, and that should help the cause. And it's also valuable for Bear that he's got maybe one of the best running backs out west and in the Big 12, and reigning Offensive Player of the Year, L.J. Martin, in the backfield. If those two stay healthy, that's quite the tandem, and that helps the cause for Bear to be his best self every single week. And, I think that he's in a really good spot. And I think also, too, with Bear that, he hasn't let the spotlight really change him. He noted that his biggest NIL purchase really wasn't even a purchase. It was part of a sponsorship deal that he got with a car dealership, so they gave him a car.
Wow.
But really, nothing's really changed. And he got that right after the Portland State game last August, just a, modest vehicle. But he says that he just hasn't, he kind of goes about his business, nothing much changes with him, and he still seems like the same guy. So I think that's kind of noteworthy, too, that he's not letting the fame and the spotlight get to him and change who he is. He's still operating kind of the same way, but a little bit more confident and more of a leader than he was a season ago, and more knowledge of that offense. And all of that together should lead to Bear being a much better quarterback this season.
You love way too early polls as much as we do. ESPN.com has one up today, spring edition. And the Cougars, they have placed at number 12. Too high, too low, or just right?
I think that's about right. I think BYU is a team that should be in the mix to be top 10. This is a really good football team this year. BYU, there's some questions in some of the key spots at quarterback and running back in terms of the depth, because if Bear or LJ goes down, that just alters everything for BYU. So it's a little bit of a tightrope for BYU to keep those guys healthy at all costs. But I think this BYU team is going to be pretty good. And they've shown that the last 2 years, the way that they win, and it's a lot of different styles and a lot of different faces, have kind of put together these 23 wins over the past 2 seasons. I think it's fair. And, again, the wide receiver spot's an area where there's some questions still. But, defensively, I think BYU's in a really good place. Coming out of spring with, I laid out my post-spring depth chart on the site and on Cougar Tracks, and you kind of go through all the names, and it's some of the most talented you've seen from a BYU team in years, because you're getting now to the point where there's some second string guys that we're generating four stars and getting Power 4 interest across the board. 5 years ago that wasn't a thing, where BYU, it was very limited, the number of guys that were getting Power 4 offers that were on the roster. That's really built up quite a bit since BYU joined the Big 12. So even if an injury happens or two on the defensive side, it seems like they're in a place personnel-wise and the development that they feel confident that they can kind of still maintain a high level of play. Obviously, too, with Kelly Papinga being the first-year defensive coordinator, there's going to be some questions to see how that all works out. But, I do get the sense coming out of spring that they are going to be, as he put it, very multiple, where they feel they could, be that odd front. They could play even front. They got the personnel to do a lot of different looks week in, week out, to really throw teams off guard and kind of maximize their abilities. So I think it's a really good team. And I think the schedule sets up really well for BYU to get on a run and possibly set up a massive game against Notre Dame and then with Utah. This schedule is in a pretty good spot for BYU to climb the rankings. And if they get a starting spot like that, everything will be in front of them to, not only, get to the Big 12 championship game, but maybe crash the playoff potentially as an at-large team. And so it's critical to have a high starting position. I think BYU, that's about fair from ESPN.
Who's the best defender on this team, and why is it Faletau Satuala? Yeah,
so Faletau Satuala is really good. And I think it's either him or Isaiah Glasker.
It is. I was looking at it, and I was like, yeah. And then, Kedu Loave comes in, and he comes with his own list of accolades. You can make a case there. But I think in those, at the very least, you have guys that are super, super experienced. really good leaders, and obviously are all going to be looked at as guys that could not just potentially be Big 12, all Big 12 teams somewhere. They could also be All-Americans, which a couple of them have touched already.
Definitely. And Satawala, he was second-team All-American by the Football Writers of America last year, and that was basically being part-time starting safety until the midway point against Arizona. I think Satawala, he's got the ceiling to be one of the all-timers at the safety position for BYU. You know, he was talking at the end of spring if this will be his last year because he'll be a junior after this season. And look, if it goes well, you'd have to think he's going to have to entertain the idea of the NFL, and rightfully so. If he has as big of a year as we think he will, he should consider the NFL. But he said he'll keep his options open. As he told you guys, like, there was a real conversation, a real decision that had to be made about following, either Jay Hill or going to the portal, going to Michigan, or staying at BYU. And he stays at BYU, and he seems pretty happy about that decision. Even his younger brother is going through the recruiting process. Recently took an unofficial visit to BYU, Kalepi Satawala. So it seems like he's really enjoying his time with BYU, but he's just a versatile athlete at the back end of that defense, and he's excellent. And with him and Raider DeMooney and a guy at safety that's really trending up since spring ball at the end of it was Tommy Parasis, who kind of got forgotten about. Mm-hmm. He was the player that had that big scoop and score against K-State 2 years ago. Last year dealt with injuries. They've got the ability with Satawala and DeMooney and Parasis to all three of those guys play at the same time. Parasis played a little bit of nickel last year, but you could have Satawala on the field side, boundary, whatever you need to do on the back end. They could line him up anywhere, and he can create so many mismatches potentially. And then you pair it up with those linebackers, as you know, with Glasgow and Uluwave. There is a lot of talent for BYU, and if you're Kelly Papinga, you want to keep that top end healthy as much as possible. But again, I think they've got some depth at some of these spots that where, if you get a player that's a key guy injured, you still don't maybe feel like everything is lost because, you look at the inside linebacker position, you got Jake Clifton, who comes in from K-State, had a really big spring. They just feel like they're in a pretty good spot with how they built up their depth, and that means that there's going to be high expectations. You got to deliver big-time results. Evan Johnson, the cornerback for BYU, told me they feel like they can be the best defense in the country. That's a high bar, but, that would be up there with, like, the 2012 defense as one of the best defenses all time in BYU history. But that's kind of the feeling coming out of spring. They feel very optimistic about what they can become under Kelly Papinga in this first year in 2026 on the defensive side.
Real quick, I had a question about tight end Roger Saliaponga, the transfer from Oregon, who I watched and called games for when he was at Orem High School. The kid's a freak. He's unbelievable, 6'4", 245. How is his spring? Do they expect to get some production from him this year?
Yeah, he's going to be what's interesting about him is he's so athletic that he's almost like a wide receiver, and with that size still. And whereas Walker Lyons is more the traditional tight end, he can be a blocker, he's a nice receiver too, but you kind of think of him more in that traditional, maybe Carson Ryan tight end role, where Saliaponga, creates potential mismatches because of that size and his athleticism. And, that tight end position was a spot that I think evolved really nicely for BYU. And they're going to be utilized quite a bit, you would expect. And they still also have Noah Moeaki as probably that third option. He was a guy that got a touchdown grab to open the season last year. And then Kean Need, who's still primarily that red zone blocker for BYU. So they've got four tight ends that they feel like they can play in games coming out of spring ball, which is a huge shift from where it was a couple years ago, where it was basically a couple blockers and no factor in the passing game at the tight end position. Roger Saliaponga and Lyons are going to be a pretty good tandem you would expect for BYU this season.
Mitch Harper doesn't need a tandem. He can do all this on his own. He is our
not everything on his own, apparently.
Oh yeah,
glad your wife is back.
Yeah, we're glad that we're glad the transfer portal
order restored at the Harper home.
got back to normal there. When it comes to BYU, nobody does it better. Mitch Harper, our BYU insider for KSLSports.com. Mitch, thanks, man. We appreciate it.
Mitch.
Hey, thanks, guys. Take care.
There you go. Love Mitch, man. Spent a lot of long hours with Mitch in tight rooms too, and at weird hours. we've recorded stuff, and we're two bigger guys, like 4 a.m, and we're like heavy breathing, wishing that our day was over, and we still have to break down the Big 12.
We drove home together once from Vegas.
He's a good.
We carried a conversation the entire way home.
I love it.
It was awesome.
Okay, we're going to take a break here. We'll come back. We have more right around the corner. Stay with us. 97.5 KSL Sports Zone.
Make game day yours. Tickets, food and drinks, stats, and streaming. Everything you need is in the Utah Mammoth app. Download today and make game night easy. Download on both Android and iPhone. Just top.